Hi everyone, Tracy DW here. Well, I met my deadline and submitted my second assignment with only 10 minutes to spare. But school, in both senses of the word, is finally out for the next few weeks and I'm officially on leave. I can relax, decompress, and give more time to focusing on other important things, such as family, friends, and this podcast series. Once again, I'd like to extend a warm welcome to any first-time listeners and a welcome back to my regular co-listeners and co-learners who have been following me on my learning journey about the British Empire and Britain's colonial past. This episode is part 3, the final part of the Name That Podcast challenge. If you've listened to the first or previous podcast episodes for this month, then you will know that I'm doing a special promotion for the month of March 2024, which is a Name That Podcast challenge, where for each episode for this month only, I'm going back into past episodes and releasing segments or clips from 5 episodes. Listen carefully and see if you can name all 5 episodes correctly. If you can, then you're in with a chance of winning an exclusive Stories to be Told merch bundle. The only requirement is to guess all 5 clips correctly for only 1 out of the 3 parts. You don't have to name all 15 clips, though if you can, I'll be very, very impressed, and I may have to think up of something extra special for you if you win. So, without further delay, let's get down to business with this, the final part of the Name That Podcast challenge and the 5 clips that I've selected. So here we go with podcast clip number 1. Name That Podcast. Fast-tracking visas, because suddenly there is plenty of room on this small island. Does the war in Ukraine provide the opportunity for Britain to adopt the moral high ground and practice virtue signalling? Over the last few days, having watched video footage on news channels and on social media, one particular interview stood out. This was with a Congolese gentleman, a student who was studying in the Ukraine. He told his account of how he, like many other Africans and Asians, had been stopped at the Polish border and told that he could not pass into safety, but had to stay and fight for Ukraine. Podcast clip number 2. Name That Podcast. Who, at the time, were less seasoned at exploration and maritime combat than the English. There was no possible way of outmaneuvering the Spanish, who dominated South American territory, and the reality of setting up a trading company, let alone a colony, would have been hampered by the fact that much of the targeted area was nothing more than malarial-infested swampland. By 1700, Scotland had to admit that its colonial aspirations had been trashed and surrendered the area of land to the Spanish. Podcast clip number 3. Name That Podcast. The Chocolate Factory. If Ghana is to achieve such an economic utopia, then what are the key issues that the country needs to overcome and address? Well, there are many issues to consider. Cocoa has a long production cycle that is sensitive to variants which are both labour and resource intensive. Hybrid varieties of beans need over 5 years to come into production, and trees need 10 to 15 years to reach their full bearing potential. Much of the population work within the cocoa industry and rely on it for their incomes. Therefore, government incentives and price regulation is really important in order for a living wage to be sustained. Together with high labour costs and low rainfall, deforestation is also a huge global issue, and the balance between clearing land for planting and regrowing and replenishing forest areas is a delicate one. The Cocoa and Forests Initiative, which was part of the UN Climate Change Conference in 2017, created an international agreement that no more forests would be converted for cocoa farming. Podcast clip number 4. Name that podcast. They say that the darkest hour is just before the break of dawn, and this was a dark hour, or should I say, a dark 2 hours. As I wrapped my thermal jumper and shawl over my shoulders in response to the afternoon heat, I felt as if I was back at Southwark Park where our journey of crazy all began. We had been on the move for over 12 hours. It was the first time Hannah, her daughter, and I became aware of our fatigue and felt our energy draining, but our motivation and spirits were still high. Finally, at 3:50 p.m. we moved through the security, and 13 hours and 17 minutes after the start of our journey, at 3:53 p.m, we entered Westminster Hall. What struck me as I walked through the entrance was the atmosphere. And finally, clip number 5. Name that podcast. Are not the same. History teaches us that there is a clear distinction between those who are African and those who are of African descent but acknowledge their heritage as African. Two groups of people whose experience of colonialism and empire follow two chronologies running parallel to each other. One group remained in Africa and suffered oppression in their own land, while the other group was carried away from Africa and experienced oppression in foreign lands. Each of these two chronologies embody different experiences of slavery, emancipation, revolution, nationalism, and journeys toward independence, as well as the heroes, villains, and freedom fighters who fought for it. This is so fundamental to understanding African and world history, but it is often overlooked. Whether you are African or belong to the African diaspora. So there it is, the third and final part of the Name That Podcast challenge. Now, if you haven't listened to parts 1 or 2 of the previous episodes, I've decided to make a few changes and have not 1 or 2, but 3 winners who will be receiving the exclusive Stories to be Told merch bundle. Just check out storiestobetold.com on the homepage and you'll be able to see the full details there. I've also decided to run the challenge beyond March and will close the competition on July the 31st, when I'll be announcing all 3 winners on my live show from a surprise location. So, if you think you have the 5 correct answers from part 1 or part 2 or from this the third part, then just send me a message via the website, email or on SpeakPipe with your name and a contact email, and give the titles of the episodes featured in either parts 1, part 2 or this final part. You can enter as many times as you like, but you can only win 1 merch bundle. Please get in touch and tell me what you think about this challenge. It would be great not only to hear your comments and your answers, but also to get your feedback. It's always invaluable to me. Now, before I go, don't forget what I call the heart and soul of the Stories to be Told movement. My stories or poetic narratives, Caribbean Wind, Caribbean Rush, Nights at the Round Table, the Berlin Conference 1884, and Gone with the Wind, Macmillan's Speech for Change. These are all available on the website in both Kindle and paperback formats, and in ebook format at applebooks.com and all other digital platforms. Also, the publication of the latest 4 titles. Now, if you want to find out more, just visit storiestobetold.com and check out the learning platforms for The Journey's End, Giving Back Hong Kong, Bite from the Big Apple, A Story for New York, Hope for Zimbabwe, Arise the Phoenix, and A Story for South Africa. Feel free to like, follow and share us on social media when you visit the website. Just click onto whichever social media link you would like to follow us on. And, as always, it's a pleasure and a privilege to share my learning journey with you in this podcast series, and I encourage you to either begin or continue your own. History is a matter of fact or perspective. I'm Tracy DW, and this is a Stories to be Told podcast. Stay safe, stay well, stay blessed. I'm wishing the best of luck to all our competition entrants, and remember, don't be shy and get in touch. Thanks so much for listening again, and I'll see you on the next page.